A congressional hearing is held, and the topic of discussion is second stimulus. Hey everybody, this is LALATE with a second stimulus check and stimulus package update for today. We have just gotten out of watching a congressional hearing with Steve Mnuchin and Jerome Powell, and we have all the breaking details for you. Hope you are good and safe. This is one of 4 second stimulus check videos today, which will be covering in part all what went on today in Congress. The other videos we'll be covering today will encompass PPP and PUA and UI, Main Street Lending Program, and finally, the twists and turns of what's going on with hazard pay. But let's get right to this one, which concerns the stimulus check itself, the stimulus package, SSDI, SSI, and Social Security. As this channel has been detailing for you, the current status of the second stimulus check debate is the following. The Senate has what's called the HEROES Act from the House. It was passed by Democrats in the House, landed in the Senate, and it's called the HEROES Act. The viewers of this channel have asked, and I've answered, that under the HEROES Act, it pays a second stimulus check to every individual who is a U.S. citizen, and pays it even if you are on SSI, SSDI, and Social Security. You will get a second stimulus check even if you are on SSI, SSDI, Social Security, or similar types of benefits. In yesterday's video, I went through the mechanisms you need to ensure to make sure you're teed up to receive the second stimulus check. Now, what's quite interesting about today's discussion was the following. If you don't know, Steve Mnuchin, who's the Treasury Secretary, and Jerome Powell, who's the head of the Federal Reserve, appeared before a congressional subcommittee led by Maxine Waters. And during that hearing, they were offered 5 minutes of questions from each individual member of Congress. And the questions went all over the place. Unfortunately, no one asked the questions that I would have asked on behalf of you. But what's interesting, what was said and what was not said about a second stimulus package. Here's what's interesting. First, as you know, back in early May, the House considered 6 $2,000 second stimulus checks that would continue over that period of time. I said it 2 different ways. 6 $2,000 checks or 1 $2,000 check for 6 months. Sorry if that causes some confusion. I've said it 2 different ways. The minimum number of monthly payments would be 6, so the minimum would be $12,000. Or until the pandemic drops, whichever is later. That was eventually not adopted. Another program that appeared on its face back in March in the first stimulus package was multiple $1,200 checks. That ultimately was dropped as well when the CARES Act was finally adopted. As you know, the CARES Act only provided for 1 stimulus check. But in passing the CARES Act, and this is what's very important today, exceptionally important because of what I've just heard. When the CARES Act came to a vote, members of Congress said, hey, we're not going to deal with those multiple checks at the moment. We'll deal with them later when we need to get to them. Well, that time has passed. As you know, you hopefully received your first stimulus check of $1,200 for the month of March, but you never got one for April, you never got one for May, and you never got one for the month of June, as we now almost head into the month of July. What's interesting is the following. The HEROES Act, which comes from the House, unfortunately only calls for 1 $1,200 second stimulus check. But today, during the congressional hearing, it was very, very clear that every single Republican in the room, including Steve Mnuchin, never would use the word HEROES Act or the words HEROES Act. Never. They would only use the words Second CARES Act, which is really great news in several regards. First, it basically says that the Republicans who lead the Senate at the moment don't want to adopt what's in the HEROES Act still. And there's a lot of things in the HEROES Act that is good, but there's a lot of things in the HEROES Act that is bad. And this channel has detailed them. One of the things that's bad is clearly a single $1,200 check. So Steve Mnuchin, when asked a series of questions over and over again, continually, even when asked about the HEROES Act, he wouldn't even use those words. He referred to the situation as, well, when we get to CARES 2, when we talk about CARES 2, we will address these concerns, aka, I'm not using what's in the HEROES Act. So when we talk about a second stimulus check, it's still all on the table. That's what this channel has been really detailing over the last few days. And it's very important for you to understand. There's two things to understand. First, timelines. Members of Congress come back in session in late July and are gone on August 8th. Because they have to take all these vacations because they work so darn hard. They have to put their feet in the jacuzzi in the Bahamas and take a vacation every 2 weeks. You know, that's their lifestyle, apparently. I'm being facetious. But Mnuchin even talked about that the moment they land back into Washington, D.C. from the Bahamas or Tahiti or wherever the hell they are, he said they're immediately getting to work on a second stimulus package. They're immediately getting on to work on what he calls CARES 2. He understands the emergency and the urgency for it to be passed. He also understood that it will, and certainly indicated that it would be passed by August 8th. So that's all great news. We have the timeline. Next, we have the substance. What is in the CARES 2 program? And that's what this channel has been detailing by separating these stimulus check videos every day, one subject onto itself. HEROES pay, hazard pay I'm doing later today. I'm doing PUA and unemployment benefits. They're all part of the discussion. Well, Mnuchin basically said that everything's on the table. He basically said everything is on the table, which also is really great news because this channel has been detailing what is on the table. And there's a lot on the table far beyond the HEROES Act. So whether we're talking about 6 checks of $2,000 into 2021, whether we're talking about the extension of $600 of unemployment benefits under FPUC, which expires in July, whether we're talking about rent moratorium extending, whether we're talking about any particular program that you know is coming up and ending in late July, it's all on the table. So really great news. Let me get to the nuances of what was said during today's hearing. Now, I will also say that if you watched it, you may have been pissed off, as I was, because, you know, this channel represents the views of all people, whether you are unemployed, whether you're on SSI, SSDI, whether you are furloughed, where you are a part-time, whether you've lost your job and gone back and lost it again, or self-employed or small business owner. We represent everyone's views. And unfortunately, what I heard at this hearing today was a limited number of views being expressed. And you'll see them in my coverage of what happened at today's hearing. In fact, the analysts, let me start with this, the analysts who covered the hearing after they were wrapping it up said it covered a lot of arcane regulatory procedures, aka get their asses together and focus on what's going on. It said that the economic recovery of the U.S. Economy is good, but it still remains a challenge. So they basically were saying that stimulus package 1, CARES Act, is successful, patting themselves on the back, but they said that what you're dealing with now is a far different ball of wax and has to be dealt with appropriately. They fully admitted, both Mnuchin and Powell, that changes would have to be made going forward. As to the Main Street Lending Program, which I'm going to get to in another stimulus check video later today, he said that only 300 banks have applied for it. So he understands that some things are not working. Treasury said that he's very worried about certain industries that employ some of the viewers of this channel. He's worried about them employing you. He's worried about them laying you off. And those included hotel, retail, commercial real estate, and any business that has a lot of debt. They were also asked about the second outbreak or second wave of coronas, and they understood that they need to address that now. Some people say we are still in the first outbreak. Some say that this is already the second outbreak. But Powell says Powell said something really that I didn't particularly like at all, that he said he wanted to ensure that crowds together would go forward in a way that the economy would operate. It sounded almost like, people would cluster together in groups in public. It was a very weird way of a Federal Reserve head talking, but he said he's trying to prevent banks from coming to a liquidity problem, and he thinks that he cut that by issuing new regulations about dividends last week. As you know, it's very, very important to ensure that your bank does not go default, does not go belly up during this pandemic. What is the government? What are we looking at now? So they understood, both the Federal Reserve and Treasury at this hearing today, that there are concerns that what they're doing is not necessarily open to enough viewers, open to enough citizens, open to enough people. For example, the Main Street Lending Program just recently opened its doors to nonprofits who were excluded. If you've been with this channel since the very beginning, we've been covering the Main Street Lending Program since March, but it only went live a few days ago. And initially it was closed to nonprofits and solo practitioners. Powell said, hey, we made a mistake. We have now opened it to nonprofits. So it's now opening to other people. He was asked about thresholds for these lending instruments, and he wants to drop those. What was very good generally was that both Mnuchin and Powell understood that some of the things that they have proposed aren't particularly working as designed and need to be relaxed or changed so that people can give this money. The other big thing that was clearly apparent, it was repeated several times, and this is great news for you as well, was this talk about debt. As you know, debt, loans, borrowing. Both Mnuchin and Powell said that sometimes debt on top of debt is not the solution. And so they don't inherently want to keep on throwing debt on top of people that already have debt. The solution, of course, is grants. The solution, of course, is free money. The solution, of course, is stimulus money. So Powell actually said that in some cases, you don't want to keep on giving debt to people that are severely indebted. They need another type of stimulus. And the only other type of stimulus to debt is grants, is free money. He said there's structural problems. These companies and these people don't need more debt. They need more support. And so that was a big issue. Those were exact words. There are structural problems. These companies don't need debt. They need more support. He specifically spoke about the hotel industry, which, depends on your state, but in California, at least it's here in Los Angeles, hotels pay their minimum wage is actually higher by law than the normal minimum wage. So if you work in a hotel here in Los Angeles, you do make a lot more money for minimum wage than someone else. Well, hotels are having problems because, in Powell's words, they can't service their debt. They can't make their loan obligations because they don't have you, the employees, back. And they don't have revenue. They don't have their doors open. They're not paying you. You're furloughed. And so Powell is worried about that. He's worried what was called about CMBS loan instruments, which I won't go into what they are, but it's basically for property owners or hotels or anything that's commercial related. They can't take on more debt because those obligations don't allow them to do so. What am I saying? The problem is that a lot of these lending instruments that people currently have that are maybe your employers, maybe your property owners, maybe your landlords, their current debt instrument does not allow them to take other types of debts. And if they do, then their first debt gets called, and then they really are in big trouble. So you see why Powell understands that he doesn't want to just throw more debt on top of debt. He really wants to start thinking other ways through. And that brings us back to stimulus. It brings us back to stimulus checks. It brings us back to grants. The great news was that Powell and Mnuchin both detailed extensively that they have a lot of money sitting around for a second stimulus package, a lot of money. That a lot of the money for the first stimulus package was never used, and that the amount of money that they allocated for the entire pandemic has still not even anywhere been exhausted. So this is really great news. It allows the ability to financially afford stimulus checks, multiple stimulus checks, payment of SSI, payment of stimulus checks to SSI and SSDI, and payment of stimulus checks to Social Security people, payments of stimulus checks retroactive. It allows that ability because the money is there. A lot of really interesting things. Understand fully that this is Mnuchin and this is Powell. And when asked by a bunch of older congresspersons who are put there by lobbyists, their job today, in some regards, those congresspersons, were to ask the questions of their special interests. And so a lot of questions were big business. It was a little bit disconcerting. But there were moments in the hearing in which Powell himself or Mnuchin themselves volunteered that they understood that these programs are very fluid. So the takeaway today was the following. One, there's a lot still on the table. So great news. It doesn't matter how many checks. It doesn't matter the amount of checks. The bottom line was that no one that was in that room that was a Republican or a member of the Trump administration has locked themselves into a corner as to one stimulus package program yet. That's the great news. The second great news is that they all said that they were willing to modify things based upon these reactions they're hearing. And they wanted people to contact them and say, this doesn't work, this does work. Finally, they certainly detailed this timeline, this really condensed, work your ass off late July to early August period before those lazy members of Senate go back on vacation again. And as you know, fast-tracking bills is possible. So they can start in the Senate, they can go back to the House, and come back to the Senate. Everything can be fast-tracked. Very exciting news, still up in the air, but as always, stay FLA for more.